Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. You know, Twilight Struggle has been on the top of the list of gaming for almost a decade plus now, I think. I mean, it finally got knocked down from #1 war game of all time to #2, which is #1 is now War of the Ring. Go figure. I just did that Gondor video the other day, and thank you for liking and commenting on that video, because it's because of the likes especially that it just within a couple of days got 1,500 views. Thank you for that. Please do it again. But anyway, as far as Twilight Struggle goes, one of the things about Twilight Struggle, I hadn't seen game mechanics like this since the game Dominion came out. Because in other games actually, of course, followed suit, say, wow, what a great system. How can we adapt it to our stuff? So Dominion brought birth to a whole bunch of other deck building games. Okay, and it's gotten into the computer world as well, or in the console systems. But Twilight Struggle did the same thing. The only thing is, and this is one of the games I'm going to show you today, but the only difference is, it is so much easier to learn. Now, Twilight Struggle is not hard to learn if you have somebody teaching you, but reading the book, it is by GMT, it is a little bit intimidating. I remember, you won't see it on my shelf, by the way. As much as I love the game, you don't see it back there. Why? Because one day I got done. I hadn't played it in a year and a half. I loved the game and we played it like crazy. But then I hadn't played it for a year and a half. I took the rules out and I looked at it and I'm like, oh, no, I can't. I didn't want to invest the time. I didn't get and try to learn it all again. And I was just going to play it the one time, So, but this game that I'm teaching you today, I learned it within an hour. Boom, boom, boom. It was simple. Yet I still had the same mechanics. And it gives you that special feel that Twilight Struggle did with teaching you a little bit of history along the way. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to write a term paper after playing Twilight Struggle or the game I'm going to talk to you about today, but you will go through it and play it and use the cards and say, oh, I did not know that. And you get one or two little tidbits about history, and that's always a lot of fun. And so today, I'm going to be talking to you about why you should be playing Votes for Women from Fort Circle Games. All right, so what I like about Fort Circle Games so far of the games that I've seen, the other one being The Shores of Tripoli, that was designed by Kevin Bertram. What Kevin's doing as the CEO, he's really picking and he's only picked 2 games, but they're really esoteric topics, right? Important topics, but nonetheless, they are there's a lot of room to learn with the game. That's what I liked about The Shores of Tripoli. What are you going to do? Another World War II game? Another Napoleon game? This one, is because it's so different, it's kind of like having Iron Man being the main character in the Marvel movies. In the 80s, he was there, but he wasn't that big of a deal. That was Spider-Man and the X-Men and stuff like that. They were the popular characters. So it's like almost a fresh slate. Yeah, I'm comparing Marvel superheroes to a war game. Go figure. But anyway, I should point out, though, that Kevin Bertram didn't design Votes for Women. That was made by this happy lady right here, Tori Brown. And she's smiling with good reason, because I think she knows she did a great job on this game. So let's go over a little bit about Votes for Women. All right, here, and I want to step in here for a second because I got to talk about this because I'm technically at the end of my video. I just got done doing all the rules and stuff like that you'll see in a little bit. But I want to talk about this because it's so important. Again, these guys at Fort Circle are trying to Tori Brown and Kevin Bertram are trying to teach a little bit of history, and they spare no expense giving you these little facsimiles with different textures and everything like that. And it's really interesting. And the thing is, I went through a real big rabbit hole with this game because as soon as I noticed something that made sense for the game but got me thinking, and here's what it is. Remember, it's the suffragists against the opposition. They don't do Democrats versus Republicans. Okay, now part of me thinks that's good for the game because that made sense. It consolidates. It doesn't make it too confusing. But also it made me wonder, wait a minute, is that political in order? Is that because they didn't want to, be real political about this? Were they just trying to be neutral, or did they have an agenda? And in this political climate, But the thing is, they don't try to hide the fact, that definitely there were a lot of Republicans at the time that actually voted to get this through, and it was the Democrats that were trying to oppose it. So it's here, right here in the New York Times, you can see the list of everything like that. So they're not trying to hide anything. And as a matter of fact, this one letter is by George A. I don't know who it is. I'm sorry. But for a Democrat, it is rather hard for me to say that from now on I will have to change around and vote the Republican ticket. I mean, they're just talking about the women's suffrage and everything like that, and it's just not something you would have thought that, especially with two people that seem to me. I mean, Kevin lives in Washington D.C. and Tori is an activist. It's something that you wouldn't have thought you would see. You know, in this climate, you would think, oh, they'd cover it up or something like that, and they did not do that here. So, quite honestly, complete kudos for them to just keeping this real to history as it is. All right, so here we have the map board and the game already set up, ready to go. I mean, it's almost to spec of how they would want you to have it set up. I couldn't do that because I don't have the space. But one of the things that I could tell you right off is a flaw of the game is the fact that they don't give credit for whoever made this beautiful setup here in the book. I mean, somebody deserves credit, and they're not getting it. This is actually absolutely captures the feel of what they want to portray here. No, there's no doubt about it. Anyway, when you're looking at the game, there's two games that come on mind. I've already told you Twilight Struggle, and the reason that has a similarity to the game is because when you're going through the game, you're going to go through an early stage of cards, a middle stage of cards, and a late stage of cards, talking about the years leading up to the end, right? So you're learning a little bit of history. Now, of course, as the game progresses, just like in Twilight Struggle, more things happen more verbosely. Instead of just trying to influence one state here with one mark or whatever, it ends up you can get four markers in one state at once. And of course, when I'm talking about that is the second game this resembles, and that is a little bit of maybe 1960 Making of a President, also by GMT of all things. And it's not a surprise on the Fort Circle website. It does talk about how Kevin likes Twilight Struggle was one of his favorite games, and I'm sure he's played other GMT games as well. And so his idea of taking Tori on for this project, I can definitely say that's some influence there. Now, so that is the idea of the game, though. You are trying to, just like a Making of the President, instead of going Republicans and Democrats, however, this is about the suffragists and the opposition. Okay, it's just either for or against, and that makes sense because it was actually a mixed bag to a large degree, with Republicans and Democrats both voting on this amendment. Okay, and the idea is the opposition player has to make only 13 states say no, and for the suffrage player to just get 39 states to say yes, and they win. So at the beginning of the game, each side gets 3 separate decks of 20 cards, each depicting a different stage of the game: the early stage, the middle stage, and the late stage. And each one is shuffled up, and 2 cards from each stage are taken out to be taken out of play. They're not going to be used. Now the thing is, you can't really rely on knowing that a card's not going to be there. It's actually easier to rely on cards that you know after you played it for a while that will be there, though. But you never know. And it's kind of like a little multiverse thing, actually, right? Because some of those are important events that happen in these cards, like the Civil War, right? What happens if the Civil War did not happen? What if it didn't happen? How would that affect women's rights? And would it at all? It's a pretty interesting speculation. By the way, I do say that each side gets a deck of cards, because up to 3 people can actually play. I did think I mentioned you can play solo against something called the Oppobot, which is pretty cool. But 3 people can play, and let's get into that. Now, I did mention that each side gets a deck of cards, even though that you can play up to 3 people in this game. And the reason that is because one player would play the side of the opposition, which of course is represented here by the orange men that are one shade away from being the evil Monopoly guy with the monocle. And we have the 2 suffrage players that are depicted in purple and yellow. And the reason that is because we're different women's organizations. And this is actually quite interesting, because when you have multiple people, even if it's one-on-one, the one person's on the same page as himself, right, or herself, as the game would play, and you're making all the right moves, and you've got everything organized. While 2 organizations that are separate, that are fighting for the same thing, might not agree with the same strategies as they go forward. And do they get in the way of each other? Do they make suboptimal moves? That's a kind of an interesting thing. Now, you can play it where it's completely cooperative, where they're just working back and forth, or you can play it blind, where they're just not allowed to talk to each other at all, and just totally get things wonky. Now, another thing is you can actually play this game solo. I think I mentioned this earlier. And you play it against something called the Oppobot, which has its own deck. Okay, I suspect it's a little easier to play against the Oppobot, even though this guy didn't win against it. And I'll get into why in a little bit. But the thing is, with the Oppobot, they have a beautiful system, and maybe they just got lucky because there's 48 states in the Union. But each region of the United States is divided into 6 parts, with 8 states being in each part. Of course, 48. So what's that mean? It means whenever the Oppobot has to decide which cubes to put in a state, they roll a d6 to find out which area, whether it be the Midwest, the South, the Atlantic, and Appalachia, like right there, or the Northeast, or whatever. And then they roll a d8 to find out what state it is. So if they rolled a 5, like here you can see right here, it's the Atlantic and Appalachia. Then they roll a 1 on the 10-sided die, and they get Tennessee. So it's pretty nice. I think they lucked out to have that system work for them. And so here we have the buttons for the campaign, the top 12 being for the suffragists, and the bottom are the anti-suffrage movements. Basically, and of course the suffrage movement can have up to 12, anti-6. All right. So how they're used is 2 ways. One, you can re-roll any die roll. Okay, like we were just talking about the campaigners, trying to get some markers into Congress. If you have 3 campaigners, you'd roll 3d6. Any 6s that you'd roll would get you a marker. Let's say you didn't roll any or not enough. You could just take one of your tokens and re-roll it. And unlike a lot of other games, you can keep re-rolling as long as you have the tokens to pay for it. Now, the other thing that the buttons are used for is for trying to get strategy cards at the beginning of any turn. At the beginning of any turn, there's 3 strategy cards. There's a small deck of them which add to replayability because you only go through so many of them in the game. But if you see one that's really juicy for you, you can say, okay, I'm going to bid 2 and I'm going to grab that one. And of course, if the opposition equals what you're paying, then nobody gets nothing. Okay, if they deny and say, oh, okay, you can just have it, then the suffrage player gets the strategy card. Of course, if the anti-suffrage movement overbids you, they get the strategy card for the turn. They are pretty powerful, so you really got to watch it. But re-rolls seem to be the key also, so they're very powerful tools. There are also 12 state cards, 7 of which get used in any one game. Okay, these never get replaced. But the thing is, as soon as you put the 4th influence marker in any state, regardless if Congress has passed the amendment or not, you get the card. And these cards actually are quite powerful. Okay, here we have the game in full bloom, and as you can see, there's a problem in the upper right with all the opposition up in the Northeast that happened to me, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't actually get to send the amendment to the states and have it already passed through Congress, because once it passes through Congress, any state that has 4 or more influence markers, it's gone. I mean, it's done, and there's no coming back from it. Here, there's still work that can be done yet. Okay, and so basically what happens here is you can, just like lobbying, which I misspoke, it should have been lobbying, not campaigning. Lobbying is where you take the card and you say, okay, I'm going to roll some dice and try to get some, columns in Congress. Here, campaigning is the same idea. You're taking a card instead of face value, but now you're rolling this little 4-sided dice that looks like a 12-sided die, because Kevin Bertram, I think, has a problem with traditional 4-sided dice, and I can't blame them. I mean, put those on the floor with a whole bunch of Legos and walk on them in the middle of the night and see what happens. But basically, you roll one of these for each campaigner you have in the area, and you can take off that many influence markers from them. So that makes it a little bit easier. Now, another thing about campaigning, two more points. When you're campaigning and you're trying to put influence markers somewhere, if somebody else already has influence markers in there, you actually don't put influence markers in, you take theirs out, okay? So it kind of does this little seesaw action. So somebody just can't have 3 of them in there, you put 4 of them in there and you get it. You actually start, if you have 4 to put in a state with 3, you take their 3 out, you have 1 left, you put that in there, it's a state of 1 now. So that's how that goes. Now, you also notice that the cubes that are in the suffrage states, the purple and the yellow, like in North Dakota there, it's got 2 and 3 of one color and 2 of the other. Well, that would work together. If the Congress had passed the amendment right now, North Dakota would be for the suffragettes because they work together. However, the reason that they're different colors is because there are some cards that focus on a specific color. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So pretty interesting how things work in that way. Okay, so at the end of turn 6, again, if Congress doesn't pass the amendment by the end of the game, the opposition automatically wins. Of course, the opposition automatically wins again if they can get 13 states to say no. If that hasn't happened, most likely it's going to go to a vote, unless for some reason the suffrage player gets 39 states to say yes. I don't necessarily see that happening. That would have to be a landslide the way they see the game being played. I'm not saying it can't happen. But what happens if none of those things happen? Well, then it comes down to the final vote. And this actually gets a little exciting. So basically what happens is any state that hasn't actually got a check mark or an X in it, hasn't been totally owned, basically each player takes a turn picking a state and saying, okay, we're going to do this state. And you roll for it. Each side rolls a d6, adding the number of influence markers they may have in that state. Okay, so they roll, and then all of a sudden you can see some crazy victories in places they didn't expect, because of that, but that also makes it exciting. Now, it makes it so, as a suffrage player, you might actually say that maybe not putting all your eggs in one basket is such a good thing. Maybe going for those guaranteed check marks might not be the thing, and you want to spread out a little bit. Because I was going for that, trying to put 4 in each one of them and stuff. And by the time the end came around, because this is my game, I ended up losing. I tried to do that, and then all of a sudden, all these votes just started going my way. Again, the opposition only needs to win 13 states, so you got to make sure you win as many states as possible. Having a shoe-in's a good thing, but I think this comes down to the final vote. And there are some extra cards that actually make it a little bit different. Like for instance, there's a card for the opposition that lets them roll a d8 instead of a d6, and there's a card for the suffragists that say, hey, you win all ties in the final vote. So it really nail-biter stuff here that actually is quite a fun. My only criticism with this part is they don't give you enough X's. They should give you like 30 X's and 40 X's and 40 check marks, or maybe just 48 of each. And why is that? Because really, you only need 13 to win as the opposition player, and they give you an extra one just in case you lose a piece. But, when you're playing the game, you're almost having a little bit of a mini story here, right? And you want to see how the whole thing pans out. I mean, if the anti-suffragists win, let's see where the story goes. How many states, if you're playing with a buddy who happens to be from North Carolina, so what did you guys do? Let's see, and stuff. And, it's just nice to see the entire map. And so I think they missed a part here. It wouldn't cost too much to actually do that. Maybe they can make it available on their website or in the second edition so you can play the whole thing through. So the best thing I could say about Votes for Women is it actually takes 2 of the most popular games out there and actually makes it into one that's actually easier and accessible to the common player. While you might be able to say that Twilight Struggle, of course, is still the #1 game, or Making a President is a better election game, this takes both of those mechanics, puts them into one, and actually makes it just so much easier to read. And no offense to GMT at all, because most of us here are war gamers and we like that stuff anyway, but this is just so much easier to dive into and teach somebody and to give it as a gift. You can't throw a GMT game at somebody and say, here you go, enjoy this. You better do some research and make sure that they like those kind of games. This you could probably throw at anybody. Guys, that's Votes for Women from Fort Circle. Another home run here. I'll see you guys next video.